basically, if you have any questions, is tape dead? Where are we going? Because we're going to online vaulting. Should I get into vaulting? How do you do vaulting? What is e-vaulting? Questions as far as RFID. I know we have a presentation later kind of sort of involving that, but just opinions, where it is now, and any future trends or anything technology related as far as questions, just fire away. So with that, I'll turn it over to Gerard.
Well, in turn it over to you guys. If anyone has any questions, we'll do our best to put a perspective on them. And
well, I'll go with in tape dead thing, right? I'd be curious to see. There's a couple things going on. Clearly, they hold more data these days, right? So the amount of individual tapes going out the door is lower than it used to be. Well, it is. From the manufacturer's point of view, it is. But the amount of data going on the tape is through the roof, right? I mean, is anybody seeing a decrease in tape volume? Or is it, we read about the tapes going away, but I don't know of anybody who's seen a decrease. Is that a true statement?
I personally think that is true. I think really people get, that essentially tape and disc, which is what the current argument is about, is essentially the same technology. It's an adaptation of the same technology. They're both magnetic technologies. They're both designed for two completely different purposes. Disc was designed for random access, fast access. Tape was designed as a cheaper media for storing backups or data that didn't necessarily have to be accessed randomly. Now, we were having a discussion about this last night, that because they're the same essential technology, it's possible that some new technology could come down the line and replace both of them. And that's what the chances are. But I think you'll probably find that magnetic disc will be replaced by memory-based disc faster than tape will be replaced. So if someone asked me the question, is tape dead, I would say that disc would, as we know it today, will die faster than tape will die. Now, the other thing is that because they're essentially the same technology, basically, tape will always be cheaper than disc because it hasn't got the componentry inside that a disc has got. It hasn't got a motor. It doesn't need all those additional requirements of random access. So, from my perspective, tape will always be cheaper than disc. Now, as disc becomes cheaper, people will fill disc, and therefore there'll be more data that needs to be backed up. So as long as tape is cheaper than disc, tape will always be the favoured mechanism for backing data up.
I think we're good now because I disagree a lot with that.
Yeah, well
that's why we're together. So I'm going to challenge the question. I think it's the wrong question. I don't think it's the media. I think we would agree on this. I don't think it's the media that matters. It's the question of online versus offline, in my mind. And it's a question of how do you move it? And you take it further to a higher level question. What problems are you trying to solve? One of the things that's interesting when you look at backup and the current mechanisms people use for backup is you break it down to what actual problems are you trying to solve. The first problem you're trying to solve is availability. In the event that a system fails, how quickly can you get that information, it's really that application back up and running? And the fact is today that tape is not a great answer to that. It doesn't have a lot of the right characteristics to really have the best answer to that. Arguably, it's a good answer in some cases, but it's not the best answer. And that's why there's been a tremendous increase in a number of the disk-based both backup technologies for the local failure as well as replication-based technologies for that system or, a site or the regional disaster. The second problem is corruption. So how do you go about addressing the issue? We need to roll back in time. We need to go back to a particular point in time before a virus came in or something like that. And tape has, in my mind, some pretty good, the concept, not just of tape, but the concept of traditional backup, where you're backing up data once a day and moving it off-site. It's pretty awful at that particular characteristic, solving that particular problem. And when you move to the third problem, long-term retention, or retention generally, retention and destruction, I kind of bucket those together. Again, you come back with, it's not the question of the media that I think is the problem, it's the question of the mechanisms and how do we get to the place where we are. And I think that it's much more about how we got here and the legacy that we have to, that the companies are facing with, more than it is that they're actually looking at the media as a problem. So I'll look at it from a slightly different perspective. The challenge with offline media is this challenge of the only way for that to work for all three of those circumstances, to solve all three of those problems, is we need to have a tremendous amount of duplication of information. I mean, a tremendous amount, not just at a file level, but even below the file level. You have the same information over and over and over and over again. If you move to an online mechanism, whether it's disk, tape, solid state, whatever that might be, you can start to solve that problem because you can start to compact that information down into a smaller subset. And I think that when you get back to the original question, is tape backup dead? I think that the real question is, what's going to help companies solve those three problems? And my answer is I think those three problems are going to be separated out. And we'll probably find that there's a component of offline media that will be helpful in addressing this. But it probably won't be fed with backup software. It probably won't be fed with a calendar-based, cram everything as quickly as you possibly can in huge amounts of duplication to a piece of media that you then ship out, as far away as quickly as you can get it. It'll probably look more like how do you tier things in a hierarchical manner to have that retention. So I guess the net of that is that at the end of the day, I think you'll end up with much more specialization of function. And you'll probably find that a lot more of that specialization is online and is targeted, there's a lot of energy and focus targeted around the efficiency component of that versus trying to figure out how to get a lower per unit cost of storage. I think, again, it's really answering the wrong question. The other wild card I throw out there is power and cooling. I think are going to drive a huge amount of decision to this over time. That if you look at the numbers, the amount of power now required in the sort of the same, if you had a data center today and you had a data center 5 years ago, for the same company, you could probably get away with the same number of square feet. But the power required, power and cooling required have gone through the roof. I mean, they're up by an order of magnitude, in some cases 2 orders of magnitude, the watts per square foot. And the reason I bring that up is that today, power and cooling a lot of people are talking about it and they're important, but most likely they're going to become the overwhelming cost. When gigabytes become terabytes, become exabytes or petabytes and exabytes, the power and cooling don't seem to be getting much more efficient. And I think that those are going to start to take over, so that the online versus offline, I think that that's where that line's going to be drawn. I think it's going to be around the power concerns. I think bandwidth will play a little bit of a part, but I think bandwidth, that most companies of different sizes, especially the enterprise and mid-market, are being forced to solve the availability problem by moving data over bandwidth, as it is today. So I think that over time, that's not going to go away. They're only going to increase that. So although the storage has grown like this, bandwidth costs have come down like this, the gap's growing a little bit, but it feels like they're just going to be willing to spend the extra money to make up that gap. So in other words, the same company might, will just budget a little more money every year to keep that bandwidth versus storage gap caught up, because they're going to be forced to.
So I actually think that the bandwidth issue is maybe the most significant aspect. The disk will ultimately get faster and faster, especially when you move away from magnetic media. But there's no technologies in bandwidth coming down the pipeline that are even going to match that. Now, if you think 30, 40 years ago, if you had said to someone you can hold the Library of Congress on a thumb drive, people would have thought they were the same. Now, in 30 years' time, you might be able to go to a tap or a faucet and fill a bucket of water and hold more data than you could think of by putting a charge into that bucket of water. Now, that might to you sound strange, but these are the kinds of things that people are working on. People are working on like biological storage, where cells can replicate to store information. Now, once you can hold such a huge amount of information and access to that information might be so rapid, if you need to replicate that data from this side of the room to that side of the room, you're going to need some technology to get it back and forth and to back it up. And I just don't think that there is, unless you're talking like Star Trek teleporting type technology, that you're limited basically by the speed of light. No one has debunked the fact that the theoretical maximum is the speed of light. So the ability to take a bucket, to link the two buckets together to back them up and take the buckets to another location, I think will still be a viable thing. And to use an example, this is a weird one, but the Israelis have done tests where they back data up to a flush card and they put it on a carrier pigeon and they've taken it from point A to point B and they've produced more throughput than they could through the telecommunication system. So that physical movement of data, I think, and for that data to be offline while it's being moved, is something that I don't think will go away. In fact, I think will become more and more critical. So, in regards to the offline and online thing, I disagree again.
I think you make some valid points. The question of how you get the data there, I think, is less the thing that I'm talking about as being the thing that's going to change. I do think the bandwidth's going to keep up. I think the bandwidth's going to keep up because people are better understanding what data is, and a huge amount of a big substantial part of that data growth is that people aren't deleting things. So you kind of have the actual net new data created every day isn't growing. I don't think it's growing faster than the availability of data. The amount that people have is because they're working from this bucket of old stuff and multiple copies of that old stuff. But even if that's true, I think that what people are going to expect is applications that actually address those core problems in a much better way. And so whether they move the data via pigeon or move the data via truck or move the data via bandwidth, I think that the place that we see the market going is the question of how you get it there is it's an important question, but it's not the important question. The important question is how do you be efficient and cost effective about moving it, but as importantly, how do you run those applications, how do you solve those problems on the other side? And I think that it's there where the calendar-based system of backup and the idea of tremendous redundancy that you have in a backup system are, that the master's not going to work anymore. I'll give you a very specific example. I came out of the LiveVault acquisition. In LiveVault, we moved, I don't know how many years ago, it was like 4 years ago, from a disk and tape-based back-end architecture, really disk sort of as a queuing mechanism and tape, to an all-disk mechanism. And the cost went down tremendously. Now, we weren't really incorporating in the moving costs because the data was already moved when it got to us. We sort of already looked at all set. But I think that when you work that math out, where there's nothing really that unique about our systems that made that cost differential so profound, it was the efficiency that we were able to gain by having that pool of information, not having to duplicate that information over and over and over and over and over again. So I'll apply it to a more practical scenario. So say that you have customers who are sending you media and you could deliver services back against that media on your side. Services like telling you what's on it, consolidating it down to smaller numbers of media, consolidating it down through history, finding out particular versions, maybe allowing them to selectively destroy older information. It doesn't matter what the media is. but may get it to you in some way and be able to do that. When now you're starting to talk much more about solving an application level problem for the customer, a business problem for the customer. And I think that that's, my view is that that's where this is going. I mean, that's what EMC and Commvault and HP and IBM, that's what they're all aiming at. The media, I think, is not necessarily the right question. The transport, I think the transport will solve itself. I think that the bandwidth piece, in major mets you can get gigabit for, a few $1,000s a month. That still moves a lot of data. I think that problem is going to be solved. But even if it's not, it's still a question of what's the back-end service that you're able to deliver. And I think the more we think about delivering higher value services on that back end, where we're cracking open that media in some virtual or literal way and delivering services against it to help them meet those original business requirements, I think the more we're able to do that, the more successful business will be.
This whole thing extends to, Gerard, you and I were talking at 1 o'clock this morning about this very issue. And my two concerns as a business owner are, one, what are the right capital investments to be making with regard to building media vaults and that solution, and how big a vault do I build, and how much is tape going away? Because I had the perception, and you came up with an effective argument because you're a lot better educated on these issues than I am. How big a vault do I build? How much is tape going away? And we talked about a specific customer where within about a 3-month period, they went from having 1,200 tapes down to just several hundred because of two things. One, they were storing more data on a different type of tape, and two, that they moved some portion of their inventory to an online backup solution. And you came back and said, well, yeah, that's true, but the volume of data is increasing, tape is still cheaper, so where they might have had 1,000 tapes and now they only have, 200 or 300, that they're still creating a lot more data, so that will build back up again, and then there'll be another generation, so it's going to be an ongoing cycle. Okay, I might buy into that. However, it still comes back to two issues. One is that I still have this perception that, as good as your arguments were, the customer, maybe I'm more sensitive to all the articles in the paper and on the internet and everything else about the loss of tape and the loss of financial information that's occurred through all of this data loss. And maybe I'm wrong, but I have a perception that in the right environment, with the right level of encryption, that the customer is going to be less exposed moving data where there is not a tangible object that can be lost, stolen, etc. So one, that's a concern to me. I want to know what my customer's perceptions are, and if my customer's perceptions are equal to mine, that a tangible object is easier to steal or lose or compromise than an online solution. I want to be sensitive to that. And two, in the sales environment, Chris Kelly, when we sat over next door talking about sales of data protection services, yeah, we have the same things. Okay, we have some vaults, and we have box storage, and we have shredding, and we have imaging, and we have digital archiving. We have all these things that we can sell, and we basically have hybrid reps that try to sell all this stuff. Okay, I want to have a more focused message. So on the sales side, what is the right solution? Do I invest in vaults because Gerard says tape's not going away because tape is always going to be cheaper than disk? So go ahead and have some confidence that tape is going to be around for a while. And so do I make those investments on capital? And is there a better message for my salespeople to be carrying to the customer? If the customer is looking to us. Sorry, I'm not very concise. I should be. Maybe this is getting a little long.
We should get you a Gerard.
I know, hard to believe. The king of presidents. You see where I'm trying to go with this, and that is, there are those large customers where the IT manager is going to be the expert. And they're going to come to us and they're going to say, this is the solution we want, implement it. But Iron Mountain's already got all those accounts. And I'm joking a little bit. But on the smaller accounts where I can really go in and be an expert, what's the right recommendations?
It's no different, I would imagine, than the same arguments people go through document storage and imaging. Should I get into imaging? Am I going to make money on it? I don't know. Would that be true, Chris? that they're the kind of questions that people would ask about imaging.
Right. That's fair.
I throw out there that the thing that there's a lot of times we use the analogy internally about, everyone always says paper will go away, and yet paper, as we know, is, we're doing very well as most of the industry. The thing that's different about paper and tapes, I'm like schizophrenic, I can argue both sides of this, I haven't figured it out myself. But the thing that's different is that in the world of paper, people like paper. There's something, there's a human psychological attachment to paper. We like it. Regardless of how you can sort of justify the business characteristics and so on and so forth, no one's figured out a better thing you can walk around with, write on, carry this thing with you. No one's figured that out. On the tape side, nobody likes tape. I've never met an IT person who wasn't extraordinarily insecure and afraid of losing his job, who wouldn't admit to me that, they didn't like tape. And companies are scared to death of inadvertent disclosure of losing the media. And, the courts so far in the U.S. have said if it's encrypted, you don't have to disclose it, so maybe that's part of the answer. But at the same time, I go back to the other side of psychology of those same people, that they're very change averse, very risk averse. And so, they have huge infrastructure. So I guess, my short answer to your question is, it's going to take a lot of time, that there's still a runway. I think that it's a 4 or 5 year runway before you see substantive change. I think that if you look at particular markets, the small business market is already moving to other technologies. It's still going to take them a while. There's still a lot of business to be had. The mid-market is somewhere between. The mid-market has some interesting solutions, but the interesting solutions they're buying today are mostly BTL solutions. And most of those solutions are really not about replacing tape. Even though, one of the leading vendors is no tape spill back in the 7th country. Even though Data Domain has all these great white papers out there talking about how bad tape is, the vast majority of people who buy that are using it essentially to fix tape. They're not buying it to get rid of tape. Not today, not yet. They'll probably happen, but it's going to take them some time. So, I guess my short answer there is it's going to take some time. Small business market, I'd be worried about the mid-market. They're spending money, and I think actually my argument is because they're spending money, because they have just evidence that they're willing to invest in it, that therefore they're more willing to buy other services. And I think we find it easier when we go in with someone who just spent $100,000 on a BTL to go in and say, you really ought to take those tapes all set every day. You really ought to, follow these procedures and so on and so forth. I think it's easier to sell to them.
Sorry, BTL stands for?
What's that?
BTL stands for?
Virtual Tape Library. Virtual Tape Library.
For me, the issue, I think, if you look at the industry today, Geoff's response, I think, takes into account what we now know, but it doesn't take into account what we don't know. We don't know what technology is coming down the pipeline and what implications will have on society. That, when most of us were children, the concept of the internet, people just didn't know. If you had said that you would be booking airline tickets online, or that you would be walking around with Blackberries in your pocket, people they weren't conceiving things like that. That we're still talking about people hate tape, but people like this. And really the issue is to do with random access, the sequential access.
It's online versus offline.
Well, and basically, at the moment, they're one and the same. That if you now look at a thumb drive is designed as removable storage, so it's an online and offline medium. So when these technologies become more prolific, when you can hold 50 petabytes on a bucket of water, and it can be accessed randomly and taken offline and it's cheap, then the issue becomes online and offline. And both of them have their own different sets of management issues. That as soon as something is online, it's insecure. That no matter how good your security is, it's available for someone to get access to. So its strength is also its weakness. When something is offline, it's apart from the physical security of that item, it is secure. That if you lock this bucket of water up in Fort Knox and no one can get into it, that's ultimately secure. If the minute you put that same bucket online, its weakness, that it's accessible and someone can worm their way into it. And I just don't think that there's enough acknowledgement of the risks of online access, because at the moment the focus is on the loss of tapes. But things can change, and we haven't had, basically at the moment, the world revolves around spam. So the people who are hacking to get into you to leverage your bandwidth for spam. Now, there's nothing to say that in another 10 years' time, they might be hacking your systems for something else. They'll be hacking it for identity theft, they might be hacking it for terrorism, or whatever, for things that we haven't even comprehended yet. So, I just don't think you can write off the offline component against random access versus sequential access on disk versus tape.
So online versus offline is less about that part of it. It is more about it's this compaction. It's this tremendous amount of redundancy that then pays for the ability to have it online. The idea that having it online from a security perspective, this challenge I have with that is that, I think the winners are already announced. People trust the internet, they trust security, and they're running their core applications online today. And so, holding their historic information somehow more valuable and more risky than their active information, I could assume you could wrap the same type of security mechanisms around it. It doesn't strike me that that's something that would really drive a decision in that area. But I do think that, honestly, my answer is I probably don't know who won't believe me, but I think that a solid state is going to be the mechanism for archiving. And it's going to be the mechanism for archiving for the reason I mentioned earlier, power and cooling are going to drive it. You have instant shutdown and spin up. And I think that's going to make a big difference.
I'm not a technologist, but is that the iPod, the latest iPod and stuff?
Mass memory, so non-volatile memory.
It's the memory question. Most devices now have, it's called solid state, it's moving parts.
Well, that's what I'm saying, the iPhone or whatever, I want the impression that nothing's spinning inside.
That's right. Well, I don't know about iPhone specifically, but generally,
iPhone.
Some of them have hard drives, some of them have no
Really?
moving parts. Yeah.
People are starting to talk about, you can now buy what they call solid state hard drives, that they basically go in, they look and feel like a hard drive, but in fact they have no moving parts. But they're so expensive now that you might get 32 gig for $1,000, and they're talking about putting them in the laptops because they're fast, they don't use much power consumption, because the laptop killer is batteries, right? That no matter how much CPU you put in and how advanced you make them, no one's going to put better battery technology that they're marketing yet. So they're now bringing out hybrid drives that have some NAND memory and some hard drive to try and get that power consumption down. But we're still talking about technology that is generation 1 technology. If you look at the evolution of computing, which is at best 100 or 70 years old, you've gone from paper card readers and tickers in the first maybe 10 years through to magnetic media, and it hasn't changed since. So at some point something will hit which is just a complete revolution to storage. And the minute that hits, the things that you'll be able to do with computers and data will change remarkably. Like when you think, I think people underestimate what happens when you do a Google search. That basically you can type in a word and you can find any information on any topic that you would not have even contemplated being able to get access to 10 years ago. Now that's all text-based. It's stuff with YouTube and things that's starting to become slightly video-based. But in 10 or 20 years' time, you might be able to type into Google your name and find your face in a crowd in a live video feed at the football on a Sunday. And people, like my children, will do that and think it's completely unremarkable. But for us now, we contemplate that and we think, well, I just can't imagine what that would be like.
I appreciate how much you guys know about technology and everything else, but really, the question we have
And the question would be, should I get into e-vaulting?
I would answer a little bit differently. I just had to say it.
Let's say you were to answer Bill's question. So Bill is an Iron Mountain. Bill is currently someone who's looking at should he build a vault, or should he expand his vault, or should he get into online backup?
So my answer would be absolutely build vaults based on the growth you've had in the past. I don't think that's going to change in the next 5 years. I don't think that there's any indication. And I say it for two reasons. One, because even if people want to change, they'll do. It's going to take time for them to actually implement it. They're going to have a whole bunch of old stuff to hold on to. By the way, a storage business with no transportation is actually kind of a nice business to have for a few years, for a while the old stuff ages out. And secondly, if you look at the human behavior aspect and the bell curve, if we just sort of look at the adoption of technology by people in IT, I don't think they're willing. I don't think that change could happen that fast. That it would make that much difference. But to answer your second question about what should you be thinking about, my answer is go back to the core of the business problem that you're solving for the customer, and figure out what is that thing that you're providing. I think we probably have different answers. From my perspective, the thing we really want to figure out is how to deliver value back on that information over the long term. And for you, it could be something different. It could be we want to provide a mechanism for security. We want to provide a mechanism for them to have high availability or some variation of availability or last resort is to come to you. And I think that if you start from that problem, if you start from that perspective, those business problems aren't going away. There's no indication whatsoever that people are going to stop suing each other. There's no indication that regulators are going to stop making more laws that dictate your behavior and what you have to keep. And there's no indication that any indication whatsoever that the growth of data is going to slow down. So as long as people are still creating that information, as long as companies stick to the basic idea that they stick to the things that they're good at. In other words, that they don't go out and start building their own facilities to store all this stuff and to deliver these services. I think you start with the customer problem and just stay close to the pulse of the customer. And I think that'll drive it further. I don't think it's as profound or radical a decision as we make internally. I don't know how you guys think about it, but we trouble over this all the time. I kind of am a victim of my own success in the sense that I was successful in convincing the whole executive team when I first started the tape was going away. And now I'm in charge of trying to grow that business. It's ironic. And the giant variable that stuck out, the thing I hadn't really contemplated, is the human psychology aspect. I'm convinced that if you allow me a few assumptions about the trends, that I can convince you that it's more economical if you're looking at starting and solving business problems to move to an online base, whether it's electronic vaulting or some other combination of technologies, getting out of tape. But it doesn't change the fact that the market doesn't work. It's not that rational. And IT people are changing first. And corporations aren't, when is a corporation going to make that, 5% of their overall budget investment on top of their normal IT investment to buy into, to make a change radically or dramatically? They're not going to do it. That's, the fact that you can rationalize it doesn't mean that that's what they're going to do. So I guess my short answer is start with the customer and figure out which of the problems that they have that you're solving today you want to stick with, and stick with that problem. And I think you'll find that that'll guide you into the right answer. I mean, that's how we're looking at it. And there are a whole bunch of services you can deliver on that data, a whole bunch of problems you can deliver back on that data. Think about the whole e-discovery business, multi-billion-dollar business. Any little piece you can get of that is, it's great business.
Which I think Geoff's answer is how we would expect someone from Iron Mountain to answer a question, in that people are coming to them and they're responding to requirements. I'm not saying they don't do it, but if you're running a smaller business, it's not necessarily like that. You're going out there and you're building something and trying to get something into it. And I think that it's a function of size, the way that you look at it. So I think, from what I understand, because Bill is my customer, so I know where he's going with this. He wants to basically know, without having a client in this, what can I build to make some money? Whereas I now am coming from, I think, from the opposite perspective of we have this huge potential client base and this huge name and huge size. What can we build to fulfill that requirement to get that equity? And I think the answers are very different.
But I don't think the core underlying fundamentals of this business have changed. And I don't think they're going to change anytime in the near future. And because I know that very little of the business we get is stealing it from you guys. Most of this is new business, net new to us, net new to self-net or unnet. And I've yet to see any information that suggests that that's changed. What's changed is that it used to be that the smaller businesses didn't care, now they care. And now they're actually doing this. If you get in front of them, they'll almost always buy. At least that's what we find. And that's changed. That's radically different. We used to just go out looking for these giant data centers, and they were, whatever it was, a couple thousand or something in the country. And that was what we focused on. Well, it's now changed. The people that didn't care before now care. They now are creating tapes at a prolific rate in small business environment. They're now creating tapes and media and information at an extraordinary rate in the mid-sized business market. And before they weren't the targets that we had. So, I certainly wouldn't, it's not really my place to give you that advice. I certainly wouldn't think that those dynamics are changing.
Why do you think it's changed? Is it legislation? Is it education? What's been the driving factor in small companies that have pushed them to come to us as vendors?
It's a few things. One is that their dependence on data and their end users' expectations for availability of that data has changed. There's no longer paper backup copies in their business. There's no longer this idea that they can be without email, be without their core, whatever their core ERP, CRM, whatever application. That's just not true anymore. And the other thing that's happened is that their external relationships, whether it's investors or customers, business partners, sometimes the board of directors, are pushing them. There's just this huge amount of regulators, of course, are pushing them to have at least reasonable answers to the questions of things like, is somebody taking this, somebody taking a piece of media home that has all this sensitive information, it will put you out of business if you lost it. That's a very reasonable question that people are being asked today. Do you have a mechanism to recover if your building burned down? I think they're getting that question a lot from their customers, which just never happened before. The expectations have shifted. And, as soon as the gun's in their head, they're being told you don't really have a choice, you have to address this. And by the way, the nice characteristic of our business is that we are the best return on investment in the context of both of those problems that they'll ever find in business. A few $100s a month to solve both of those, or at least get really, get 10 or 100 times better at answering those two questions. There's no better return in business than that. I did this presentation where I talked about the fact that people spend more water on plants than they spend on our service. Formats, and you can go down this whole list. I had like the top 10 list. You get the idea.
So, taking that one step forward, this has been a trigger for the business to move forward. And kind of go back to what Phil said. The next, there's got to be some further triggers down the line that's going to direct our businesses.
Absolutely. That was where I, start with which of these problems is the one that you think is the most important for the customer. And, for better or worse, I think about it in the context of the retention side of the problem. I think that the availability side of the problem is going to be solved by customers themselves. But I don't know. I think that varies by different size customers, different categories.
I see a huge potential time bomb problem in the future of version control. Do you agree?
A version control meaning
Software version control. So, people, keeping documents and spreadsheets and everything, and you have that capability.
That time bomb went off. That's why we and a bunch of our competitors can charge hundreds of dollars a tape to bring the data back to report a visible format.
Yeah, I don't agree with it's gone off. I think it might have.
Well, it's gone off in certain industries.
I think it has a certain industries, but I think that our core customers don't really have a clue.
Yes, I agree with you. I agree with you. And that's a risk. And that's one that, I put that in that category, go back to the basics of what problems we solve with the make sense, but somehow they do. And so they're experimenting with some really crazy ideas about how you solve that problem. Because none of the assumptions, I mean, you have to assume the same language will exist, but outside of that, you can't make any assumptions. So, you know, you start going down the list of, the computers even look the same, USB, which sort of assumed to be there. You have no idea whether any of that stuff is still there in formats and so on and so forth. It's a really, really very hard problem. And one of the biggest challenges is that find a business who's willing to make an enormous investment today to solve that problem that won't, by definition, won't impact them for 10 or 15 years. Yeah. It's a really, or possible. Or out, right? Right. That's right. Speculative. Speculative, they don't know. Yeah. It's a tough problem. By the way, if anyone's figured it out, you feel free to share it.
Where do you see RFID going?
Yeah, how much time do you have?
The abbreviated version.
The abbreviated version? I think that there will be a couple of winners announced within the next year or so, and we'll be standing in our industry at immediate levels. But I don't think the winners have been announced yet.
Okay.
I met with the major tape manufacturers, I met with a ton of the RFID vendors, and they're still squabbling, and the industry hasn't figured out which problems it wants to solve, and the customers haven't figured out, they think RFID equals security, but then you walk them through, well, in order for that to be true, you have to sort of be able to read it through its entire life cycle. So, are you willing to pay, I forgot what the numbers are, but, $25 a slot, in addition to the cost that we're already charging you to have an RFID reader in the slot? No, not even paying that. Well, we want us to light up the truck. Are you willing to pay 50% or whatever premium for us to light up the truck so we can tell you the tape's on the truck? Well, they're not quite sure yet. But that said, it seems very likely that the media itself will have the RFID tag in.
Well, LCO does now.
What's that?
LCO does now.
Yes and no. There are two different types. LTO has a type of RFID. It's not that far. LTO has RFID that the drive can read, but it has no meaningful. It doesn't have a tie to the label, to the barcode, and it also doesn't have any meaningful range outside the immediate vicinity.
So it has RFID designed for different applications?
Yes, that's right. That's right. That's right. That's a better way to put it.
And I think that's the issue, is the drive within basically, in the past, there's been no drive for the application we want it for. And it's possible that technology may not even meet our expectations for that technology, that maybe something else will come down the line. That, we've been playing around with it, obviously, as Geoff has as well. And it's a cool thing, and you can do some cool things with it. But the thing that we want it to do, where you can basically do an inventory of a bolt like that, and if a tape disappears, that you know about it straight away, is not something that anyone can even talk about offering. That it has serious limitations, and limitations within the way that we currently do business. That if you've got a steel box that you're storing the tapes in, and you've just invested, $50,000 in, say, coverless containers that are steel, then you're going to resist any move to RFID because you've made that investment.
Because they won't read through steel containers, is that why?
Unless you put a reader in the container, which is then going to add expense to it. That the only people who have a commercially available product are Nation. And from what I'm hearing, anecdotally, that they're not selling much of it.
Technology is changing though. Like supermarkets are starting to use it in checkouts, or are going to. So you walk up with a trolley full of groceries and you just go, bing, thanks very much. There's your total.
Yeah, but once again, that's a different application that,
Why is it a different application?
Well,
they're tracking your pack of biscuits, we're tracking your tape.
Well, but it is, and I think you hit it on the head to start with. It's what problem are we trying to solve, right? And we're going to do that whole session. That's all we're going to do, is try to facilitate that discussion, which is, well, it can do a million cool things, but what problems do we have that it could solve?
And the essential problem, if you put a list of problems together, the one problem that everyone wants to solve is the tape being on the truck. That they want to know that as soon as you take possession in the chain of custody of that item, that if that leaves your possession, you're alerted straight away about it. And basically, I don't know of anyone at the moment who is realistically thinking of rolling that out, just because of the limitations of the technology. But even if you go on a retrofit, the LTO RFID tag, we're using it for other purposes. There's no way that we could really use it for trucking purposes. Imagine is telling people that they can use it for trucking purposes, but I think they're having trouble proving that to people that they can do that.
They use HF, and HF is inches, and UHF is potentially feet in the passive form. So the UHF Gen 2 seems to be the good way, but it's not clear yet. You can't actually buy it. Everyone talks to us like, oh yeah, that's what it'll be. Go find me a version of it.
Well, this data card product they have, as I'm like we've had them in the Dog and Pain show from the nation, and it's a pity they weren't here because they could have shown us, but maybe that's a sign that it's not working for them. Sorry? We tried very hard to get them along, and you would think that this would be a good market for them. But basically, they have a reader that's the size of a large suitcase, and they put another case next to it to read those RFID tags. But if you're using the inbuilt LTO RFID tags, every tape has to be oriented exactly the same way, and you have to rub it up against, like they have to be end to end, and you have to spend like 40 grand on hardware to do it. Well, basically what we're trying to stop is the random events. So if you put 20 tapes in a case, and an LTO is square, so it could be one of 4 ways. Well, if one of those tapes is the wrong way around, you get a completely false understanding of what's in that case. And kind of what's the point of going there? It's basically, I think that application is too immature for us to even do that. And then they're talking about, if you're not using LTO, you follow the RFID tags, and understand the FC guys sent out a press release a few days ago that they have just released their RFID solution as well. Which is basically buying RFID tags, putting them on tapes. So anything that's really got an existing barcode on it, you have to peel it off and put it back on. So even if they were managing to get market penetration today, for us to use it in our bolts and our workflows over the next 3 years, it's doubtful that it will even happen.
The other challenge that I found in the security area is that people don't so much care to know when the media fell off the truck or whatever it was. They want to find it, and in fact, that's the actual problem that they struggle with more than the inconvenience of having to go through and look for it. It costs money, but not the kind of money and reputational damage.
But it's maybe they're one and the same. That if you know the second the RFID tag goes missing, then you stand a pretty good chance of finding it.
It depends on how much of the process you want to consider, and the thing that the problem that people don't really have is listen, I think you can have is literally the truck door coming flying open, and people are able to figure out lock doors and that kind of thing. It's more the vehicle's in an accident and the boxes are all over the highway, and you want to be able to to go find that piece of media, those pieces of media, to make sure they didn't fall in the back ends, or somebody screws up and leaves it on the sidewalk or whatever. That kind of scenario. We haven't figured out. When I was doing that research, I haven't figured out a way to make that the RFID solves that problem. And some interesting combinations, but I haven't figured out how to
If you use the GPS, basically this is all about the point at which you lose it. That there is no technology known to man that once something gets out of your control and someone is actively trying to hide it, you can find something. That the only way, from my perspective, to save yourself is to not lose it in the first place or find out when you lose it straight away. Because even GPS systems, I think Howard's not here, but those guys were pushing that last year. They didn't show us, but that's their thing. That you put a GPS tracker in place, but as soon as someone gets in an underground car park or something like that, or a parking lot, But I guarantee you that like the US military isn't probably spending that money on things that have much more intellectual property. So to make the argument to a small business to spend that kind of money, until the people with the money to do it start investing in that, there's no way that anyone else is either. No one else but
Okay, so we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you, Geoff and Gerard. It's tough to be an Aussie today. Thank you for BareMetal. Hey, Geoff. They told me to give you this, Gerard. Thank you. So, I don't know what the deal is out. Like I said, around. But we're going to go ahead and take a 5-minute break. Up next is the